Seven Exits Leaving Behind What No Longer Serves You, featuring Dr. Rosenna Bakari. In this episode of the Talking Addiction Recovery podcast, Dr. Rosenna Bakari, author of Seven Exits Leave Behind What No Longer Serves You, shares a powerful conversation about empowerment, recovery, shame, healing, and personal transformation. The discussion explores how empowerment differs from traditional psychology's focus on pathology and mental illness. Rosenna shares why people often struggle more with leaving familiar situations than with knowing where they want to go, and how understanding the function of behaviors can create deeper and more meaningful change. Topics in this podcast include empowerment and addiction recovery, shame and self-forgiveness, comfort culture versus true rest, risk-taking and personal growth, trauma and adverse childhood experiences, worldview exploration and counseling, and healing beyond addictive behaviors. This conversation highlights the importance of addressing the underlying experiences beneath addiction, while encouraging listeners to recognize their own capacity for growth, healing, and change.
This is Talking Addiction and Recovery, the podcast talking, you guessed it, all about addiction and recovery. Join your host, licensed professional counselor Andrew J. Schreier, as he and his guests break down recovery topics with raw honesty, delving into niche conversations around the topics of substance abuse, mental health, and gambling. We intend to meet individuals where they are on their own personal journey of recovery, with dignity, respect, and compassion. We'll do more than talk addiction and recovery. We'll explore it. We're glad you joined us. Here with today's episode, your host, Andrew Schreier.
Dr. Rosenna Bakari is a leadership consultant, empowerment expert, and author of the book Seven Exits Leaving Behind What No Longer Serves You. With a background in psychology and educational leadership, she has spent decades helping individuals and organizations create meaningful change through empowerment and self-awareness. Early in her career, Dr. Bakari worked in the field of addiction recovery for several years, supporting individuals and families through the challenges of healing, transformation, and rebuilding their lives. Today, her work bridges personal growth, leadership, and emotional wellness with a practical, empowering approach. You can learn more about Dr. Rosenna Bakari in the podcast notes. Before we get into today's episode, if you're a licensed or certified behavioral health professional, I want to make sure you know about something that could save you time, money, and maybe even a PTO day. Talking Addiction and Recovery is now an improved continuing education provider through IPGGC, NASW Wisconsin chapter, and NADAC, meaning you can earn CEUs just by listening to select podcast episodes and completing a short post-test. No conference, no webinar registration, no membership, no paid platform. Just the content you're already consuming, working for your professional development. Head over to www.andrewjschreier.com for everything you need. All right, let's get into today's episode. On this episode of Talking Addiction and Recovery podcast, we want to welcome Rosenna Bakari. Doctor, thank you for coming.
Thank you for having me here. I'm looking forward to this conversation.
Same. And one of the things we're going to talk about, your book, Seven Exits, Leave Behind What No Longer Serves You. Before we do that and dive into it, can you give the audience just a little bit of a background about yourself?
Yes, so I am an educational psychologist by training, but I have a variety of experience in terms of clinical work. And some of my earlier work was actually with addiction and recovery, chemical dependency. So I've come across the board and now I'm dealing with leadership and empowerment. What I love most, though, is that I feel like my work has always been consistent. When I look at what was important to me as an addiction and a substance abuse counselor, it's the same thing as what's important to me when I look at empowerment. And so I feel kind of good about that.
That's great. Thanks for sharing that. Your book, one of the things I love the cover, the Seven Exits, and also as I'm thinking of it when I first got it, I'm a big visual person. I like to see things in my mind as I'm, understanding things. So where did the idea or inspiration behind Seven Exits, Leave Behind What No Longer Serves You, where did all this come from?
So I'm a survivor of childhood abuse too. So I've also had my own journey. I've taught counselors. So I really give a wide perspective on this whole mental health field. And so in my own recovery, one of the things that I found was that it was when I went for professional help, it was very much focused on helping me relieve guilt and shame. That part was important, and then helping me feel okay. And I already had a PhD when I went into my own healing journey at the level that I really needed to. But what I found was that it left me still missing something, and it took me another 5 years at least and continuing to work. 'Cause remember, I'm still working, I'm still writing, I'm still doing all these things. And finally, I came across what was missing in my own healing journey, and that was empowerment, where I started to ask myself, okay, because even before I went into my journey, I was successful. I'm one of those hidden people, right? Struggling. And we don't get a lot of invitations. And this is where my work came from when I realized that I was not externally struggling. I was successful by, any public um, justifications for what success means. I was still internally struggling, and I found that really difficult to articulate to people who see you doing these wonderful things every day. And so, what I finally realized was that it was a sense of empowerment. So, even when I stopped carrying the guilt and the shame, even when I could articulate what had happened to me and how I felt about it and where my recovery was, what I realized was that not much in my life had changed. Not much of my behavior had changed. So internally, I had changed. And so I really started to ask myself, if I've gone through this growth process internally, why hasn't something externally manifested? And that was a big question for me. And so that's what led me into the whole question and the whole then writing more, investigating more, researching more until I got to this whole field of empowerment, which I found was not a big word in psychology, which is what my background is. They talk about it much more in sociology and social work. And so I had to go across areas across research field to get to where I was really wanted to be. And then I brought a lot of that stuff into reframing what I wanted people's transformation journey to look like. That was a
That's
long answer, but hopefully you got it.
That's one of the questions I wanted to ask you is empowerment is a word that is not frequent in the work we do. We often talk about powerless. We talk about lack of power. It's you don't see empowerment in treatment curriculums. It's usually not, hey, today's topic is going to be empowerment, or when we talk about like skills and recovery capital, like all these things, empowerment is not one of those common words. It almost seems like we talk more about people's lack of power or their inability to. So I'm seeing you're nodding as I'm like, yeah, exactly. So like, why has that been absent from this area? And for you to bring it in is pretty important because we don't hear it a lot.
So my answer is if we look at the field of psychology, and I say my answer because it's not the only answer, but what I've come up with, the whole field of psychology is really based on mental illness, not mental wellness. So remember, we have the DSM of illnesses, yet we call it mental health, right? So that's one of the contradictions. So we built a field making people not feel ill, not really transforming people into wellness. Just like when I go to my doctor. Now, keep in mind, I'm a marathon runner. When I go to my doctor, they do not care 2 cents about whether or not I can run a marathon. It's not what they're checking for. They want to know that what my blood pressure looks like, how my heart is beating. They're not testing me to see if I can run 26.2 miles. That's empowerment, right? They're just looking to make sure that I'm still breathing. And so when I started working with people, including myself, I want people to feel, not just feel like they're no longer suffering, but feel empowerment in their lives, to feel like they can take it from here and create whatever it is that they want. But we haven't left the conversation of mental illness yet.
The notion of the seven exits I thought was really insightful because I think sometimes we we word exiting is such a simple thing, like to just leave or walk away from. I really liked in chapter two, right out the gate, the first thing that I highlighted was the problem isn't that you don't know how to get to where you want to go, is that you don't know how to leave where you are. And I think that that captures so much that we think, well, this person doesn't want to go there, or they don't want that, or like they're not motivated enough, or they don't want it enough. And it's not necessarily like where people want to go that's so challenging, but as you kind of put in there, that it's just that we don't know how to leave where you are, which is such a big challenge. So, can you speak more on that? Because I feel like that is not always how it's worded or how people are always trying to talk with people about change or about accomplishing something or stopping a behavior. That often we think of, well, like, let's just really highlight how great it is over there. And for
Right.
most people, like, they can see, like, they get that. Like, I don't know if they really question how much goodness can come out of there, but part of it is it's really hard to leave where I am. So can you speak about that? Because I think that's really, really
Sure.
important.
Right. It's the power of departure that I love talking about because if you don't, it doesn't matter if you don't have gas in your car, you can't go anywhere. Your GPS, it doesn't matter what your GPS says. You know your GPS is going to take you exactly where you want to go. You have to put the gas in the car. You have to have a car,
Mm.
right? You have to have a car. You have to put the gas in the car. You have to have the keys to the car. So there are all these things we don't think about when we go look at our GPS because it's going to take us from where we are right now, right? So that works. So if you're already coming with an empowered framework, somebody telling you how to get to the next phase makes perfect sense. We forget that we're sometimes talking to people who don't have a car or don't have the car keys or don't have the money to put the gas in it. And so it's like, whoa, what do you need to even start? What are you missing at go? That's going to prevent you from following the instructions of getting to where you are. And that's what 7 X's does. It slows people down to say, whoa, 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 whoa. I know you're trying to get over there, but that let's really slow down and see why you're stuck in the mud here.
Yeah, one of my favorite sayings is slow down to speed up.
Yep.
And in one area that I think about this so much, which is where I connect this to what you write about, is I think of stages of change. You know, a lot of us familiar with stages of change, motivational interviewing. And to me, I see a lot of people go from the um, pre-contemplation to contemplation, right? And then all of a sudden, we kind of want people to hurry into action. And a lot of times we miss preparation. Like we completely, because people either start to get really excited or motivated and I'm tired of this, so I just want to start, like, hit the ground running. But then how quickly do people sometimes burn out because they're really not prepared for either the journey of where they're going or for how to leave where they are. So to me, when you talk about slowing down, I know that sometimes when people are looking to achieve a goal, do something different, it's really hard not to hit the gas pedal. But once again,
Mhm.
if there's no gas in it or there's no keys, like you're just in that horror movie, you're not going to get very far. So, how do you talk to people about like the benefit and the value of slowing down when they are feeling like there's this need to speed up?
I do really go into, as you mentioned the term, like um, the motivational interviewing and really asking people questions to help them get it, right? Like I would say, oh, well, when was the last time you saw those keys, right? Did you get permission to drive that car? Oh, wait. And so really trying to guide people into a level of self-awareness so that they can then determine what their readiness is and not keep their focus on where they want to go. Because one of the things that happens is when people slow down, it's that it's common for them to realize, oh, that's not even where I wanted to go. That's where someone else wanted me to go, or that's where I was told I belonged. But now that I see it all, it's not even really where I want to go now that I have choices. So really getting people to reflect on the why. I'm the 2-year-old, in the session, and why, and tell me why, and tell me why. So,
Which means you can kind of sit with that, right? You can sit with someone who's uncertain because that can be uncomfortable. Like that's one of the things that just like revs anxiety up is uncertainty. But like part of it is let's sit with this for a while to ask the questions or understand really more about it versus just jumping ahead to what maybe and so many things you mentioned, like that they don't really want or they think they have to, or something they've been told, or just really not knowing. So I appreciate that presence of yours to sit with uncertainty, knowing that that is usually what makes a lot of people uncomfortable.
right. The flip side of that is that as a helper, when you can sit with people's uncertainty, it allows you to sit with your own uncertainty that they may spend this whole 50 minutes with you today and not move a bit. And that has to be not only okay with them, that has to be okay with you too. But if I see my role as the fixer for them, I'm going to keep trying to tell them where they have to go. And
Yeah,
that that
but
makes
then
it
you're the one
worse.
that you pour your own gas in the car, you're driving the
Right.
car, like, and then what does that really do?
Right.
You just found someone to come along on your journey. You didn't really support someone in their journey.
Exactly. Exactly. And that happens too often.
Yeah. I noticed one thing that I really appreciate, and I've seen this sometimes in a couple other books I've read, is you've got poetry in your book. I really, really enjoyed that. And I've started to notice some people adding different things to books, so like either poetry or art to things. And it's so beautiful and it helps me to even read more poetry than I would normally. So where did that, passion or love of yours come from? And why was it important to add to the book as part of it? Because I think someone could easily think like, it could be without it, but like this was really important to have as part of the book.
Yes, thank you. When I started to speak my own truth, a lot of it came out in poetry. A lot of it came out in poetry before I could articulate it as a academic or a researcher or someone on stage talking about the abuse, right? A lot of it, like probably a good 4 years of it came out in therapy before I would like publicly speak. Right. And so I know that that's the poetry is the language of healing in so many regards. And so when I wrote the book, I confess I only had one poem in the very beginning of the book. And in the first draft, when someone read it, they said, why isn't there more of this stuff in here? Are you kidding? And so someone actually had to tell me to put more of it in there. And so then now I have one that opens up each exit. And readers constantly tell me how important that is and how much more meaningful that is than because then it's at the beginning of each exit. So it really helps frame what's coming in the exit and how much more of it they can grasp. So I'm glad that people are really receptive to it because my eyes were not that clear about the importance of it.
Yeah, I mean, one of the favorite parts is Exit 7, Purpose and Passion. The ending of that poem was, no one can tell you what comes next. All you must do is be your best. Each step from your past has led you here, but it's the present moment you must now let steer, because the time is now, the time has come. Let your heart tell you what must be done. And there's just a lot of great parts of like your poetry that connects with everything that you're writing, and that sometimes it really just helps to stick more. It just helps to really think about what you wrote about. So whoever told you that, kudos to them, because like I think there would have been a lot of missed treasures if all this poetry was not added. So whoever that was, double thank you to them.
Thank you. I'll let her know.
Yeah. One thing that I thought was also really great, going back to my the thing I've been doing most is work with substance use, and I work with mental health and other things as well, gambling. And I know one of the things that really stood out, which I thought it would be really good for not just people who struggle with substances, but people who are family members, loved one, is this quote that you put in here about um, there were still healing tools available to me when running wasn't an option. Here's what I've learned. We often grow deeply attached to the things that sustain us, whether it's the way others treat us or activities that make us feel calm, elated, understood, or appreciated. But just because we're attached to something doesn't mean it's a need. I thought that was really important because when people are doing things that doesn't make sense to us, I feel like there's a disconnect on realizing what function that's serving, and you labeled it so well there by saying that it sustains us, like it is what, and it doesn't mean it doesn't have any other impact or doesn't have any other consequences, but when we start to think like, well, why would someone do this or why would someone act this way or like clearly we're thinking of it from our standpoint of like, well,
Right.
I don't know why this makes sense to do. We're kind of forgetting that a lot of the things that people can get attached to is because it basically helps to sustain, or even another S word is survive
Yep.
what it is
Yep.
that they're going through. So I thought that was really important, not just for people who may be struggling with a certain thing, but for family members and loved ones to realize maybe if I begin to understand more about what sustains or what this is doing, like I at least have a better idea of like what they are really struggling with. Because we say, well, they're struggling with substance use, but behind that is what
They're
really is
surviving with
matter. Yeah,
substance
yeah,
use. They're
yeah.
struggling with something else.
Right. So we easily say they struggle with substance use or they're struggling with this, but like what we don't really think to look for is what is all that behind it that the substance use is actually attempting to help sustain or survive or the person gets through. So when I read that, I thought that was such a great way of talking about it without really having to get too deep into like what's addiction and all this type of stuff. Like that was such a clear way of talking about something that a lot of people have a hard time comprehending.
Thank you.
So when you write about that, um, do you look at how certain things like the word attachment is a pretty big thing. Attachment theory has been around for a while, but we kind of look at that term. It's been we, not like empowerment. Attachment's been pretty well talked about
Right.
in our. Do you do you look at things when you work with individuals or talk with people about the attachments in our lives or things that people get attached to and how that plays a role in why it's harder to leave where you are or why sometimes it can be more of a challenge to get to where we want to go?
Absolutely. I think understanding our patterns is the most important part of the work, and seeing what we are attached to, whether it's a pattern of being where we can't say no to our spouse or our parent or our kids. That's an attachment. Like, and then what is that holding us back from seeing? What is the fear underneath? Is it the fear of failure, the fear of not being loved, the fear of being wrong? Like, what is the fear that covers up? Right? The fear of triggers coming through. And so when we can really talk about and own what is my attachment to this, and let's move the word attachment. Maybe what is the value of this thing to me? Because when we want to help someone, we're always telling them how bad it is, right? And then you're just up against resistance. But if we talk about, tell me more about the value of this thing, like, what does it help you do? How does it help you get through your day or your week or your conflict? So, if we can really understand that and appreciate that, like really appreciate that you have something that's helping you to survive. Now, it may be hurting you in other ways, but it is helping you to survive. And what if we could replace that with some things that work just as well? They're just less rehearsed.
Yeah, I always like the question, what's good about your blank? Like, what's good
Right.
about it? And sometimes the person's very caught off guard because they think I think this is one of the stigmas of the profession is like if someone thinks I'm an alcohol and drug counselor that I must hate all alcohol and drugs and think that I want everyone to like never use a substance again. So when they hear me say, well, what's good about your alcohol use or what's good about your marijuana use, like they're anticipating me thinking there's nothing good about it and like I'm just gonna
Hmm.
have all the terrible things to say. It also catches off parents and loved ones were in the room when I say, "Well, what's good about your vaping?" And they're like, "What?" Like,
You can't ask them that. Yeah.
but it does something so different because when I try to most of the time when someone's come and seen me for counseling, there's already someone who's probably already told them about the negatives about the behavior. I'm probably not the first one to be like, "Hey, has anyone ever told you about this or that?" Like maybe there's a couple things they don't know, but there's probably someone else in their life who has already stepped
Yeah.
in to say how bad this is or how negative this is. And then what I see is when you try to really kind of like hammer that how bad it is, then the person tends to just defend what they're doing. Like they just kind of become the defense of the behavior or the substance. And now it's
Yeah.
just like it just feels like a court battle, right? Like now they're the defense attorney for this, I'm the prosecutor, and we're not really getting anywhere versus me kind of being like, no, like let's look at like what does this do for you? What purpose does it have? What value does it bring? What does this do that you can't get anywhere else right now? Is a much more conversation in relating to what it does for them. And that's a much better door to be kind of walking through and talking with.
I love that. It places you in a different possession because when I say to you, like, you shouldn't be doing, like, I'm speaking directly to the part of your brain that's doing that, right? But when I ask you, what's this doing for you? I'm speaking it opens a conversation between me and the person who knew they needed something else to survive, not necessarily the person who's doing it, if that makes sense, right? Like I'm moving back a layer because like you said, the person who's using is already full of defenses, but there was a decision before the use, and now you're targeting that layer of the person.
Yeah. Yeah, I'm really glad you write about that was very insightful. So thank you for that. There was one chapter title that I really, really liked. It was 23 on comfort culture. And the subtitle was The Blur Between Rest and Rust. And I thought that was
Mhm.
so insightful and creative because like how many things do people look at like this is my resting or recharging, and I don't know how often we really look to, is it doing that, is this providing me with that rest and recharge, or is this now creating some rust, like I
Mhm.
think when someone's, it's easy to pick on like TV. I mean, TV just gets picked on. So like someone who's like, well, I just need to rest and kind of recharge. So they watch, like a binge night of TV shows. But now this becomes like a regular thing. And they begin to see this as, well, this is how I rest and recharge. But it's like, and, at one point, is this becoming the rust now?
Right.
Because like you're sitting down or you're saying you're relaxing, but you feel more tired. You feel like you have less energy. I don't know if we always take the time to really reflect on, are the things we're saying we're doing to recharge us and give us rest, really doing that, and how quickly we can kind of fall into, I think I may have gained a little bit of rust.
Mhm.
So, can you share just a little bit more about the importance of that? Yeah, I mean, it's a whole chapter, but that whole thing of rest and rust really stood out to me as something important that we don't always think to. My mind says to interrogate, but maybe to inquire or to maybe be curious about. Can you share a little bit more about that?
Sure. And I can relate it back to the introduction when I was talking about coming into this and what has changed. I mean, we're human beings that are changing all the time. And unfortunately, we've begun to associate that with success. We should have more success. grow, but we should be able to see some growth in our lives and in small ways. And so when we are just resting and staying the same and nothing has changed and we're comfortable and we call that rest, it is something for us to take a look at. How have I done? What have I done different in the last year? It could be watching less television and spending more time creating a business. It could be having deeper conversations with my children. It could be going out of the house more. It doesn't have to be something of some great magnitude, but something where I can say, I'm still shifting. I'm still evolving. I'm still taking risk. Like, what risk have you taken lately? Where
And our
are
world
you?
doesn't like that. Like, how important is
I
that? Because we
know.
are usually, I say this all the time, we're usually a profession of risk avoidance because we talk so much about things that are like high risk, that increase risk. Risk leads to like safety planning, crisis planning. We tend to be a profession that is very, risk has been the problem. This is what has led to issues. And here you go talking about how risk is needed for growth. But once again, it's another word that we hear it a lot, we say it a lot, but it's usually how do we contain it? How do we minimize it? How do we take it away? We don't often talk about what the positive and what the good risk can do when it comes to growth, but we know it needs to be there, right? Like
Right.
when we tell people to go to a meeting, there is risk. You got to risk going somewhere the first time, meeting people you've never met, telling your story. When we tell people to go do something new, some new activities, some new interests, like there is risk of not being good at it, or there's some risk of like, well, that wasn't fun. Like we know that's all there, but we just tend to be very avoidant of talking about the word risk in a healthy way.
Mm, right. And when we explore who we are, then part of that self-discovery is also understanding what risk has meant to us and because that's going to vary from person to person. And so when we talk about risk, really being clear what that means for that person, because like you said, we can't grow without risk, but we also know risk brings the opportunity for failure, right? And but we should never avoid opportunity. We should never give up opportunity to avoid failure, right? And so too
Mm.
many times we do that. We're so busy trying to avoid failure that we also give up opportunity. And so if we first have to accept that failure is a possibility, every day failure is a possibility. It's only a temporary event. It's not an indication of our worthiness or our value. And if we're not doing things in life that could give us some failure doesn't mean we're not going to eat today. Doesn't mean we're not talking about those big risks. We're talking about, like you said, oh, I'm going to go out to a meeting. Oh, I'm going to have dinner with a new person. Oh, I'm going to try this. Oh, I'm going to do something new. And not that I'm going to collapse my life if something goes wrong. Yes, I got into a relationship and that person ghosted me again. This is the fifth time I did it. I'm never going to have a relationship again. Well, when you do, that's going to be a risk. Like you can't so then we can talk about, okay, well, what does that mean to not be in a relationship, or what does it mean and what's happening where that same outcome comes every single time. Those are things we can play with. But when you say I'm just going to not take risk anymore, then that's a choice. That too is a risk because you're risking the lack of growth.
Yeah, super important. I love having that conversation that sometimes people are a little not so comfortable having because we're just normally kind of reinforced to not be comfortable talking about risk. Another part that I thought was really important was chapter 8, The Art of Unforgiveness. I thought that was really, really important. But part of the thing that I highlighted was while forgiving others can feel necessary, healing often starts with self-forgiveness. And, I see this a lot when people, maybe I'm seeing someone for gambling and they've stopped, or I've seen someone pornography addiction, and they've been abstinent for a while. And one of my clinical supervisors who did a lot of work with guilt and shame, we've always talked about how do I live with what I've done? Because simply stopping, and I say simply in a very loose way, but when I stop, there isn't this like now everything's all great and grand. Like I know people who will struggle with the shame of what they've done or choices they made, behaviors, and there's no like, oh, you've been abstinent for a year. Now that shame goes down by like 15%. Second year, it's gonna go down.
Right.
Like someone can be abstinent for the rest of their life and still struggle with. And sometimes what I hear from people that I work with is that they don't think they're worthy of forgiveness. Like there's this almost
Yeah.
scarlet letter that I need to wear because of what I've done, that I'm not worthy or I don't deserve it. And so when you have the art of unforgiveness and you talk about that quote that I mentioned, I think that's just really, really powerful because I think we sometimes get stuck in this pattern of thinking, well, if the person goes into recovery and they address some issues, then everything's going to get better when that can just stick with you for a really long time about how do I live with what I've done or how do I live with what I've gone through, even no matter how long length of time it's been since that happened. So can you speak on how important that is and even how do people start to step in that direction? Because without that, healing is really, really, really challenging.
It's very challenging. And how quickly, as if it's really quick, I don't think it is, but how one of the contributions to that also depends on what are the long-term consequences of their addiction, what happened there. So, like, did they mess up their entire lives in terms of employability, for example? So if they can't get back any semblance of what life could have been, that shame is gonna stay there. It's gonna linger longer, right? Sometimes people can get back to where the evidence isn't there, but for some people the evidence is always there. That's the hardest thing. And you really got to work through from unforgiveness to forgiveness. And oftentimes I'm gonna suggest that really is probably gonna take some professional help, someone that constantly reminds you of who you are and what you deserve, especially if you have people in your life who haven't forgiven you. Because there's nothing we can do about that piece, right? But your life is still your life. And so, however you have shown up in people's lives in a way that may have hurt them, yes, that becomes their work to do. That's no longer your work. Like that's no longer your work. That's their work to do beyond your own sense of I really want to be forgiven. I've asked for forgiveness. I've done whatever I can on this side of the fence for forgiveness. Then that's their work. Has nothing to do with you anymore. So then how do you go from where you are and create the life that you want unapologetically, regardless of how those people perceive you? Easier said than done. And oftentimes it does require some professional intervention to help you get there, right? But even for those who lives become like again without any markers, uh, a lot of it requires a real shift in your worldview. And that's important because you can stop drinking or smoking or using, but if your worldview doesn't shift, then the shame lingers, the sense that there's some God that's going to punish me or there's someone I'm concerned about my afterlife. So your worldview has to shift into a place that allows you permission to release the guilt and shame. But if you continue to have a worldview about punishment and deservedness, that's going to be a tough one.
That's a really important question because we know people's beliefs come out in different ways in the work we do. Like we think of like cognitive behavioral therapy where there's a belief about something, right? But it's amazing, like I'm just thinking, what if I ask people that I do counseling with, like, hey, what's your worldview? Like how like where would you even go with that? But we don't always take the time to almost just be very direct on it from the get. We think we discover it as we work with someone because we start to like see more about their thoughts and certain things. But how incredible would it be to be able to know, earlier on. We asked so many questions on assessments and intakes. Imagine what those questions would be is like how in 2 or 3 sentences, how would you describe your world? And just to get some idea of like how they would respond to that. I imagine that would give you so much value to what doesn't get answered by asking about, a yes or no, a checkbox, a
Yeah.
amount, a history. Uh, so I really, really appreciate that insight into who knows, I might ask someone next week. When I
Yeah.
meet with someone, I might just say, hey, 3 sentences, how do you describe what your worldview is, and just see how they respond to that.
Mhm. Or sometimes you can ask them, like, what's the one thing that you really believe in strongly? Like, what's the strongest belief that you have? And see what
Yeah,
they come up with.
I like that. I appreciate that. One of the things that we really started to really talk about at the beginning of our conversation was empowerment. And when we get towards the end of the book, when we talk about possibilities are endless, that feels really like motivating, and that feels like, oh yeah, like there's so much that I could do and whatnot. And it's fascinating because part of the thing that stands out, you ask, do you want to be free? And then quickly, right after that, it's, but what if the greatest thief of your freedom is you? What if
Mhm.
without a fight, you've handed it over, one belief, one habit, one truth at a time? The most dangerous chains are the ones we never feel. That's the power of indoctrination. I thought that was so. I just never. You think of freedom and other things being taken away, and there's a lot of things that um, systematically and all these other things that when we talk about power and all this type of stuff. But then I'm also like, this reminds me to think back of like Viktor Frankl's work, like A Man's Search for
Mhm.
Meaning.
Yeah.
And, one of the most situations where you had very little control or you had no idea what was going to happen, even if you did everything you thought was right by following orders, that doesn't mean something bad didn't happen to you. So it seems like we often need a stark reminder about this, that we don't often see it in our everyday life. We seem to need like this really big thing, like this big T, if we talk about trauma, to remind us about like the freedom that we have, and that we can exercise it even when we feel like someone's taking it away from us. But we often miss how that plays out in our everyday life. And so when you write about this, the possibilities are endless. We often talk about, big things. So someone who's dealing with substance use, it's maybe stopping use and they're on recovery. Maybe it's because they're gonna give up one substance, maybe not all, but maybe just one. But we often don't talk about like the little everyday things that we hold ourselves back from, that prevent us from even getting to those bigger things, right?
Right.
So how do we begin to see that freedom aspect in just the stuff that we do every day, that, it's, I could be where I want to go, circling back to even the beginning part of not just where I want to go, but what's keeping me here. Isn't this part of that freedom that just keeps us stuck here even kind of every day?
It is. I
The little ways.
Here's what I think the challenge is, especially when we come to addiction, is that often we and sometimes this happens in recovery, sometimes before recovery or after recovery, but we keep the focus on, like we were talking about before, the addictive behaviors. We keep the focus on that when we talk about freedom. And so we say, because you're an addict, you can't do A, B, C, D, and we give the list of do's and don'ts, right? Except we keep avoiding the conversation that created the addictive behavior. And so when we're not, so the patterns that we develop, we're not honest in talking about, but these patterns develop not as a result of the addiction, but as a result of the behaviors that led to the addiction. So I know, as a survivor of childhood sexual abuse and all the research that I've done, that we're talking about 85% more likely to be in addiction. And we don't talk about those things enough, the kinds of adverse experiences that lead to addiction. And so we keep trying to cure or curb the addiction without really opening up space for people to look at the experiences that have led them there. And so when I am afraid to do this, I could say because I'm dealing with addiction or I'm in recovery. The truth is that fear was likely there before the addiction. And so we can't separate, well, we can, but I think we don't do people much good when we separate the addiction from the experiences that contributed to the addiction.
Yeah. And that's really, really important. Because I can see like that creates that narrative of almost keeping people from thinking like what they can like their empowerment, right? Like that sort of like limits, holds back, restrains from thinking that they can do something, even if it's from the self-forgiveness to the risking trying something new, all the things that we talked about. Like it's that narrative that can almost build that invisible, like you said, invisible chains or invisible cell that
Right.
that we do.
One of the most amazing things when I was on my healing journey, I'll share, is that when I started really dealing with being a survivor of childhood sexual abuse, and I went to the research, right? And this is part of why I got into the work too. All the research was talking about like I didn't first of all, I didn't know there was research. I'm like, oh, there's a name for this whole experience. And so what was phenomenal to me is that when I looked at my life, now keep in mind I'm a psychologist, I'm married, children, all the goodies. I have all the goodies, but when I read all of the internal stuff, the difficulty with the relationships, and what's going on with my body physically, with fibroids and all this other stuff, and the way that I feel inside, the way that I think about the world, the way that I shrink in the world, the way that I show. When I'm reading all that, I'm going, what the? But here's the catch. They're not talking about me in the research. They're talking about women who come in with addiction. I'm not in that. So they're not talking about me and what it means for me to have these same things without the addiction. Right, right. So my healing process in some ways still is very similar. I don't know why I didn't get into addiction. There's some psychological, physiological, I don't know. I had some other markers or safer markers, but I can tell you what was happening to me in the suicidal ideations, all these. So when I had to heal and recover, I don't see those as any different than what someone else has to do to heal and recover, even though their main survival pattern is addiction.
Yeah. Very well said. I appreciate that perspective and insight. So, last question before we wrap up. We talked a lot about different words that have been pretty present in our profession, words that have been pretty much ignored. And one that you've mentioned a lot was empowerment, and you write about the seven exits. Where, for someone who's listening and thinking, what power do I have? Or there's no way I can do what I would like to do or what I like, whatever the case may be. What's your message to someone who is really struggling at the idea that to them, empowerment may sound great. It might sound amazing, but they feel like they don't have the car, the, the gas ain't there, the keys, who knows where. So for someone who is in a position like that, like what do you say to them when it comes to empowerment and what they can do or where they can start? What would you say to them?
I would encourage them by reminding them that we all have power. Some people have a whole lot more than others stored up and readily available to them, but we all have power. And so the first question I would ask is, as an individual, me, just me as an individual, what do I want to do when life feels hard? Like I want to write out a manifesto for that. When life feels hard, I'm going to call this person, do this thing. For me, for a long time, it was running, right? When life gets hard, I'm going to run. And I did that for years. When life gets hard, I'm going to take a vacation. When life gets hard, I'm going to do this, but something that's accessible to you. You can't say vacation if you don't have money to take a vacation, right? You can't say run if you don't have the fitness to run. So it has to be something like I'm going to write poetry, like have a manifesto. When life feels really hard, I'm going to do this thing. And it should be more than one thing that's available to you. And so when you have that, it gives you permission, one, to understand that sometimes life is going to be hard, and two, to know that you're going to survive. You've already put survival in place. So many times when life has been hard, we try to resist it ever being hard again. And so we start living real safe. And when we choose safety, the first thing that happens is that dreams go out the window. We stop dreaming. And when we stop dreaming, then we stuff gets stale. We start doing the same thing. We start playing it safe. We start keeping the same people in our lives, etc. So if we commit to, I have this thing that I'm going to do whenever life gets hard, that gives me permission to go out and risk something to manifest an outward expression of empowerment.
Thank you. It's really gonna be important. I hope if it's any big takeaway that listeners have, it's exactly what you just said right there. So a lot of good takeaways in the discussion around your book was absolutely amazing. As we wrap up, what is final message or what you got going on, what you're doing? We'll have links to where people can find your work, find the book, and learn more about you. But what would be either like a final message or takeaways you'd like listeners to know?
This is great. One is that I do have a private platform, and that'll be in the link too, or if you get to 7X's, you'll be able to find it where people can do their own work. Because sometimes what I think happens with people who are dealing with whatever it is, they go and they get in that click and they don't leave it. And so, like when I was addressing my childhood issues, I was in a group of childhood issues, and that was it. And people remain there, and they don't look at any other thing. And so I think it's real important for us to come to own our broader sense of what wellness is, not just what addiction is, but what wellness is and what does it look like for me to focus on my well-being. And if people are ready to do that, then by all means, please check out 7X's because there's so many resources and ways that they can do that. And so I invite people to find me there.
It's great. Thank you so much for the conversation in the book. Seven Exits Leave Behind What No Longer Serves You. We'll make sure everyone has links and access to where to find that and connect with you. But Dr. Bakari, it was an incredible conversation. I appreciate you coming on the podcast.
Yes, anytime. We can do this again. I appreciate the time and the work that you're doing is so important.
One quick thing before you go. If you've gotten value from this show, from this episode, or any episode, the best thing that you can do to support it is to leave a review on Apple Podcasts. I'm not asking for anything elaborate. Tap the stars, write one sentence about what this show means to you. It helps more people in the behavioral health and recovery space find us.